Hello, this is Reza from RADACAD, and in this video I'm going to talk about a basic of DAX functions in Power BI, which is about two types of functions, scalar functions and tabular functions, how these two types of functions, understanding them is important when you write DAX expressions and where to use each. Let's see how it works. Depends on the type of output for functions. In DAX, we can say we have two major types of functions. One is scalar functions. Scalar functions is a function that return a single value with any data type. It can be a numeric data type, it can be text, a string, it can be date, time, whatever. For example, here sum is an example of a scalar function. It just returns sum of the values from this column. If I use it as a measure, I get the total sales like this. If I use it in a table visual, for every filter applied in a table, this column can be considered as a filter because it filters the value of the measure. It returns one single value. Each time it returns one single value. That is a scalar function. And we have lots of scalar functions: sum, count, average, minimum, sum x, average x, related, calculate. A lot of these functions, calculate especially, because you might seen that used a lot in a lot of measures. These are all scalar functions. We use scalar functions inside a measure or a calculated column. So if we have these three types of calculation, in fact it is three, because quick measure and measure behind the scene, they are the same thing. It's just two different ways of creating the same thing, right? So if you have these three, you can create two of these using a scalar function. You can use that to create a new column or to create a new measure, right? On the other hand side, we have a set of functions that are tabular functions. And tabular functions are functions that returns a table. They don't return one single value. And one of the simple examples of that is this function, all. All is a function that returns the entire table without any filters. If I use it this way, there are other variations to use all which would behave differently, but this just returns that table without any filters applied on it, right? You can use it to create a copy of that table. It's a good approach to create role-playing dimensions for your date table and things like that, right? So all is a function that returns a whole table. And you can use it in a calculated table. That's the place you can use it because it returns a whole table. Now, this table sometimes have multiple columns, sometimes have one single column, but it's a table. It's multiple values. It's not one single value, right? So this is tabular functions. That previous one was scalar functions. Tabular functions examples are all except, related table, calculated table, dates between, dates in period, many examples like that. Treat as, these are all same period last year. These are all functions that are considered as tabular functions. Now, so far this is simple. Now let's see when the problem happens. The problem happens when you use these in the place that they are not supposed to be used. For example, if I use a scalar functions in creating a table, I will get an error. For example, here I have a table and this is a new table, and I said this table is equal to sum of sales amount. It doesn't really make sense. Sum of sales amount is one single value. How that can become a table? And you will get this error that says this expression is returning something which is not a table expression. So here a table expression is expected, which means that you need to use a tabular functions here, right? Same thing if I use a tabular functions function inside a measure. For example, here I have let me just bring another measure. Maybe I remove that, but let's say in this measure, if I say this measure is equal to all fact internet sales, I will get an error, and the error is saying that this expression returns multiple columns because all returns a table. But here we do not expect multiple columns, we expect a scalar value, right? Because it's a measure, right? So using a tabular function directly inside a measure or a calculated column to return the main result, giving you error. Using a scalar function directly in a calculated table to return the main result is giving you an error. So what you can do, you are quite limited if you think about it that way. The thing is that you can use it, you can use these functions inside each other. That's one of the main thing about DAX. In DAX, we have functions used inside other functions, and that is when the calculation becomes more close to real-world calculation. For example, let's say I use this expression. This is a measure. As you can see here at the top, it's a measure, right? This measure is saying that calculate sum of sales for the same period last year. Now, when you look at this calculation, same period last year is a tabular function. This function returns a table that is all dates in that date column. Depends on the filter applied in a visual, of course, but it returns a table. This is a tabular function. However, this tabular function is used inside a calculate function. Calculate is a scalar function. So the scalar function here accepts multiple parameters, and one of those parameters here, for example, this parameter specifically, is a tabular function, right? So here we expect a table, and tabular function returns a table, so as a result, these two can work with each other. And because the measure's output coming from this function, this is the function that returns the whole result, and it is a scalar function, it works just fine, right? Similar to this, what if I have something similar to this in a calculated table? Here is an example of a calculated table. I have a calculated table using group by function, which is a tabular function. But inside that, I'm using count x. Count x is a scalar function. It returns one single value. And if you noticed, inside that also I have another tabular function. So tabular function used inside scalar function is used inside tabular function. You can nest DAX functions like this. You can cascade them like that and use them, as long as you are providing the right input to each function. Okay, now you might ask, okay, how would I know that which is the right input? I'm writing a measure, I don't know. I don't know which functions I can use, which functions I cannot. For example, let's say you want to write a measure using SumX, right? When you start typing that, you'll get the definition of the function, and the definition of functions tells you a lot of things. Here it tells you that this function returns sum of an expression. So this means that this is a scalar function itself because it returns sum of an expression. It has two inputs. One input is a table. So you can have a tabular function here, or you can have just a real table, just a table in your data set, and then an expression, which can be a scalar function. So a scalar function here, tabular function here, and the function itself, SumX, is a scalar function, right? You can get this information here, or you can get this information from MSDN docs. So you can basically just search for SumX DAX, and usually one of the first links comes is docs.microsoft.com, which has a good expression, a good definition about the function. It tells you that this is the function. The first input is a table. The second input is an expression. So you can easily understand that tabular function here, scalar function here, and the return value is a decimal number, is a single value. So this means that this function is a scalar function itself, right? So when you understand these, then it would become easier to write these expressions. So this is how you use this. However, there are some restrictions. There are some, let's say, exceptions. For example, one of the restrictions is that if you are using group by, I'll bring this expression here as well. If you are using group by, inside the group by, if you want to use calculate, you cannot use that because that's a restriction on this function, right? It actually tells you that the restriction on expression, you cannot use calculate. Calculate is not allowed. So although calculate is a scalar function and expression part of a group by function should accept any scalar function, it doesn't because of the limitation of this function itself, right? So always look at these informations as well, restrictions. There are other types of functions as well. For example, one of those functions is cross filter. Cross filter is a function that you use to change the direction of a relationship to make it both directional or single directional. This function returns no value, right? This function is used only for changing the behavior of a relationship, and it is used only inside a calculate, right? So if you put these restrictions and exceptions aside, understanding tabular functions and scalar functions is really helpful because you can easily understand how and where to use it in your expression and makes writing DAX expressions much simpler. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have weekly videos of Power BI and AI.